You know, for as long as any of us can remember, we've been told one very specific story about ancient America, a story about a wild, empty land where people showed up pretty recently. But what if that story isn't the whole story? What if it's just the last chapter of a much, much bigger book, one that's been buried right under our feet this whole time?
Okay, let's really dig into this, because this question right here is the whole ballgame. We're about to look at some seriously compelling evidence that suggests the history we learned in school isn't just a little bit wrong, it's missing entire civilizations. We're going to explore a version of the past that, for a very long time, we were told was pure fantasy.
So where do we start? Well, you have to start with the foundation of the entire official story, the timeline. Because that timeline, which everyone thought was set in stone, is starting to show some really big cracks.
Okay, look at this. This lays it all out perfectly. On the left, that's the story we all know. The Bering Land Bridge, the Clovis people, about 13,000 years ago. Simple, neat. But then, you look to the right, and you see this growing pile of clues that are just inconvenient. Evidence that pushes the date for humans in the Americas back, way back.
And this is where it gets really wild. We're talking about actual human footprints, fossilized, in New Mexico, and they're dated to 23,000 years ago. Just picture that for a second. Kids and adults walking around, leaving tracks in the mud, alongside mammoths, a full 10,000 years before we thought people were even on the continent. And way down in Chile, we found a whole community that was up and running 18,000 years ago. This doesn't just challenge the old timeline, it absolutely shatters it.
So you're probably thinking, if the evidence is so clear, why is this still even a debate? Well, a lot of it comes down to the tool we use to date everything. This sort of historical clock that, it turns out, might not be as reliable as we've all been led to believe.
We've all heard of it, right? Radiocarbon dating. It's supposed to be the gold standard for archaeology. Basically, it measures how much of this radioactive carbon, carbon-14, has decayed in something organic to figure out how old it is. Sounds foolproof, doesn't it? Well, not so fast. Its biggest flaw is that it makes one giant assumption that the amount of carbon-14 in the air has always been the same, but we know for a fact it hasn't. Things like massive volcanic eruptions or even cosmic rays from space can mess with the levels, which can throw the dates off by thousands of years. But here's the real kicker, the human element. There are actual stories of labs getting a sample and just refusing to even test it because the date it was found with was too old to fit the official story. It's like throwing out evidence because you've already decided who's guilty.
So, if the win is a total mess, let's just put that aside for a second and ask an even bigger question. What were these ancient people capable of? Because all across the Americas, you find these structures, these artifacts, that, according to the official story, just shouldn't exist. 50 tons. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how much some of the giant stone heads of the Olmec people in Mexico weigh. That's the weight of a modern M1 Abrams battle tank. And this right here is the million-dollar question. The stone they used was quarried over 60 miles away. They had to haul these things through dense, swampy jungle, and we're told they didn't have the wheel. They didn't have oxen or horses. They didn't have hard metal tools. So how? Just how did they do it? This goes beyond simple manpower. We're talking about a level of engineering and planning that is just staggering.
And the Olmec heads are just the beginning. If we go way up into the Andes Mountains in Bolivia, we find a place that's even more baffling, Puma Punku. The stones here are some of the hardest on Earth, like diorite and andesite, and they aren't just carved, they look machined. The precision is so perfect, it looks like it was done with power tools.
I mean, just look at these details. You have these massive H-shaped blocks that fit together like a giant complex puzzle. You've got perfect right angles, edges so sharp you could cut yourself, and drill holes that are perfectly round and smooth. Modern engineers look at this site and just shake their heads. They don't know how it could have been done with ancient tools. It suggests a completely different way of thinking, a totally different technology.
Okay, so we've seen these impossible artifacts. Now let's zoom out, because we aren't just talking about a few clever builders. We're talking about entire civilizations, vast, sprawling empires that rose to power, thrived, and then just vanished, completely swallowed by time.
This timeline is so important for getting some perspective. Right around the same time the Egyptians are building the Great Pyramid and the first great cities are rising in Mesopotamia, an equally massive city was being built in Peru. It's called Corral. It had huge pyramids, incredible architecture, a complex society, but here's the crazy part. Unlike pretty much every other ancient culture, archaeologists found no walls, no weapons, no evidence of war at all.
And then there's this place, El Mirador. It's hidden deep in the jungle of Guatemala. This was the capital of a huge Maya kingdom 1,000 years before the famous sites we all know. This place was massive, bigger than ancient Greece, with the largest pyramid on the continent. And yet, when it fell, it was so completely forgotten that not a single story, not one legend from the later Maya, ever even mentioned its name. It was just gone.
This one really messes with our perception of the past. Right here in North America, near modern-day St. Louis, was a city called Cahokia. At its peak, around the year 1200, it was a booming metropolis. As you can see, it was more than twice the size of London at the same time. It was the center of a huge trade network. And yet today, most people have never even heard of it.
All right, so up to now, we've stayed in the Americas. But for this next part, we're going to get into the most controversial idea of them all. The idea that maybe the ancient Americas weren't so isolated. What if the oceans weren't barriers? What if they were highways?
So this table lays out some of the most baffling clues. You've got the Olmec heads, which some experts argue have clear African features. You have traces of tobacco and cocaine, plants that only grow in the Americas, found inside ancient Egyptian mummies. You have stone tools on the east coast of the US that look almost identical to tools made by the Solutrean people in Ice Age Europe. Now, I have to be clear, mainstream science has other explanations for all of these, but when you see them all listed together, you got to admit, it starts to paint a very strange and very tantalizing picture of a much more connected, ancient world.
So, after all that, where are we? When you pull all these threads together, the broken timeline, the impossible buildings, the lost empires, the hints of ocean crossings, history stops feeling like a story that's already been written. It starts to feel like an active crime scene, and we've all just been made detectives.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. Maybe the problem isn't a lack of evidence. The clues are there, in the dirt, in the stones, even in our DNA. Maybe the real barrier has just been a refusal to see what's right in front of us, an unwillingness to change the story we've been telling ourselves for so long.
So we're left with these huge, game-changing questions. How old are we really? What did we used to know that we've now forgotten? How many other great empires are still out there, waiting to be found? And were we ever really alone? The old story is crumbling, and these are the questions that are rising up from the dust.
And that really is the most exciting thing to think about. If all of this has just come to light in the last few decades, with new technology and new ways of thinking, what else is out there? What's still waiting, patiently, under the jungle canopy or the desert sands? The past isn't dead and gone. It's a living mystery, and it feels like we're just now starting to read the first page.